Welcome to Climbing the Immune Ladder, for Success in Science, iiSIAR podcast, the show where we explore inspiring experiences in science and the untold stories shaping our community. Today I will be your host, Ewa Oleszycka from Jagiellonian University. In each episode, we will dive deep into conversations with experts on innate immunity in sterile inflammation, autoimmunity, and their resolution, to bring you insights, ideas, and inspiration you won't hear anywhere else. Whether you are tuning in during your morning coffee or while you are doing your lab bench work, get ready to learn, laugh, and see the world from a new perspective. Let's get started. Today's expert is Luke O'Neill from Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. We're very happy to be here.
Could you please tell us a bit more about your line of research?
Yes, well, I work on innate immunity and inflammation. They're my two big things. Of course, they're linked very closely, obviously enough. I've spent 40 years now working on the inflammatory process. I began working on prostaglandins, very old-fashioned things now. Then cytokines, IL-1, TNF, IL-6 in the early days of those. Then I got into like TLRs, pattern recognition receptors, all that area, inflammasomes. And then in the last 10 years, more metabolic changes that happen, mainly in macrophages, in response to things like TLR stimulation and innate immune pathways. And we've made some interesting discoveries, I suppose, about metabolic change recently. But the overall goal is to understand the inflammatory process in the context of innate immunity.
You are also a successful entrepreneur. Can you tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've always had an interest in drug discovery, I guess, in the broadest sense, because when you work on inflammation, you're always thinking of diseases, of course. And the first disease I worked on was Crohn's disease, for instance. And then I worked on rheumatoid arthritis, and then more and more into the inflammatory processes in those diseases. And then, of course, if you make discoveries that are worth something, you might commercialize them. So I would have collaborated with big companies, big pharma, of course, as part of it. And I got my own companies going in the end, and we were able to license stuff that we discovered in my lab into those. And then I built up some companies, and I've had three companies in total actually. The second one was acquired by Roche. They've taken an LRP3 inhibitor into the clinic now, so we're in the middle of clinical trials, which is great. And then my current company is called Citrix, and they're targeting metabolism in various ways. So I see that as a very important part of what we do.
And what initially drew you to the field of immunology and inflammation specifically?
Yeah, well, it began as an undergrad, actually. I did a biochemistry undergraduate degree. And as many would know, you do a final project in your degree, and that was about Crohn's disease, and that attracted me anyway as a disease. And I wondered, well, that's interesting. What's going on in that disease? What might be the basis for it? And in those days, prostaglandins were part of that, so I worked on those. And I guess I picked it because it was a puzzle. It still is a puzzle, actually. We don't know what causes these diseases, really, and they're rampant. They're going up in incidence all the time. I'm talking about all the autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. I just found it scientifically compelling as an area. And then secondly, immunology began to grow, of course, in that period. Like when I began my PhD, there were only two cytokines. Can you believe it? We were quite ignorant. And then who would have thought all those innate receptors get discovered? So it's a scientific adventure. And then secondly, of course, this relevance to disease is really important too. I needed the disease relevance as well. I like to think that the science might actually count for something, and that led me into the more disease-based aspects.
Did you have any pivotal moment that shaped your journey?
That's a tricky one. I don't know. I think probably when you make a discovery, and you go, oh, that's interesting. I'll stick with this. So probably the key moments for me have been when you see something very early on, when we saw NF-kappa B, because we got into that quite early. One of my papers was to show us a rapid signal, and that was exciting as a signal for inflammation. I remember seeing that result, going, "Oh, I like that." I used to carry the Autorads around with me in my pocket and show it to people in the pub. That's how excited I was. So it's funny. So in that regard, it's all about what you're discovering.
Could you highlight a key discovery on or project you're most proud of and how it impacted the field?
But that's a tricky one. That's like choosing a child that you like. If you got several children. What was the Well, the first important one was we discovered mal, this adapter that TLRs use. And that was an important, at the time, that was very sort of a part of the TLR revolution, you might call it, the complexity of signaling pathways that toll-like receptors were triggering. And as you may know, even that one in TLR won a Nobel Prize, Hugh Hoffman and Bruce Beutler. So in the history of immunology, that was a key sort of advance in a way. The discovery of those pattern recognition receptors was very important. And then we made a contribution because we discovered some of the signaling components and then negative regulators and that sort of stuff. So that was the first one I think that was especially satisfying. The next one then was NLRP3, of course, because we found a role in diabetes, that type 2 diabetes, that was contributing to its role in disease. And then very importantly, found this inhibitor. And this NLRP3 inhibitor, we discovered that. Then the next discovery was this metabolic thing. And when we see succinate in particular is an inflammatory signal. So I guess the latest stuff we're most excited about is Krebs cycle linked metabolites.
Mhm. And what's your process for identifying high impact research questions?
Oh, that's a little bit, I don't know. Luck, serendipity. I think the secret is you got to read a lot. Secondly, talk to people. And then you get ideas going between you. You know, I think a lot of ideas come from dialogue actually. And then having the ability to realize, oh, if this works, it's going to be very exciting. And what one thing I tell my students, Steve, is if you have a project, right, and there's two words in it that were never together in a sentence before, that could be a high impact paper. That could be a paper that'll make a difference, you know. And if you're often linking things that were never linked before, that's something that to keep an eye on.
Science is a journey full of challenges. What strategies help you push through the toughest scientific challenges?
Oh, it's very tough. I mean, let's not make any bones about it. As you know, we all know this, don't we? Especially when things aren't working in the lab and you get fed up and it's difficult. It's a challenging thing. But I think us humans, we love a challenge. And we're often most satisfied if we conquer a challenge that's really been difficult. You know, that's the first thing to say. So the first piece of advice is keep going. Never give up, you know? Secondly, realize we're all in the same situation. Many things are failing and it's not easy. You think to yourself, oh, why did that guy get that paper? That lab is great. They're having trouble as well, probably. You just haven't heard it, you know? So we're a part of a community, and that's really important to get support from your lab mates, from your supervisor, from your friends in science. That's a really important network to hold on to. So that we're together, you know, we're doing all these things together. I think that's a very important message I give people as well. We are a community trying to help each other, you know. So to keep going, but I mean, the trouble is, if you're a student, you think, oh, it's never going to work out. If you're the supervisor, it's, I'll give it another year. You know, we know the whole picture, you know. And then when you get that discovery, you forget the painful parts, you know, and then you keep going, you know. So always remember it's a long game. It takes time. And if you keep at it and you use scientific rigor, very important to be honest with your data and think there is something happening here and I can follow up on that, then you will make it. You will make a contribution. And I think we're in a very unfortunate time now when people think they have to get the big papers. That's nonsense. Not everybody can get a big paper because that science doesn't work that way. Any contribution makes a difference. So when I get a CV off someone, if they've got a good JI paper or a EJI, that's fine. You know, so that's really good. I'm not looking for, oh, has that person got a nature immunology paper? That's too much to ask, you know. So I think there's too much pressure on people now to deliver on these things. So never think along those lines. Just think if I can make it one discovery and get it published, that's an achievement. And that's good enough for me. And that's the way people should think, really.
Beautifully said. Can you share with us any crucial decision or opportunity you had that significantly advanced your career?
Oh, now let me think about that one. Well, I think deciding to be an academic was the first thing there. So I decided to go to a university. That's a key first decision to make. And I picked, you know, that job and I'm very happy. That was the right decision to make, you know? So you want to think about what you actually want to do. I picked a university because they're very interesting places. They've got interesting people. They're into more teaching and helping and doing research as opposed to making loads of money. Now, some people can make money. I don't mind. I wouldn't be critical of them if they decide that. But that wasn't just for me. I couldn't have done that on its own, you know. So I think the first thing was, yeah, to make that decision to go to a university as a job, I would say. The second thing, I suppose, was, deciding, yeah, to work on cytokines was a big decision again. And again, that came from, when I was a young student, I realized cytokines are very exciting now, So I picked the right area. So picking the right area is a key thing, obviously. You got to be very careful what area you pick, I'd say. Another big thing happened to me was in 2000, in actually 1999, I was offered a sabbatical in a company. They were called Millennium in Boston. I took it, and it was a life changing thing because I was in industry for about 9 months. I learned a huge amount about companies' work, about the commercialization process. So deciding on that was a big thing that really led me down a certain road. Then, if I hadn't have done that, I may not have become as entrepreneurial as you said, and may not have been as aware of the possibilities there with to do with commercialization of research. That was a key thing. Another one in 2016, I did a sabbatical in the drug company GSK in the UK. And again, that was really good. That was very informative. And I met lots of people there. I learned about drug companies. And Citrix, my company, came out of that actually. We founded Citrix on the back of that GSK work. So I got a new company myself out of it as well. So deciding to go into industry a bit was really important.
And looking back, were there career moves you initially doubted that turned out to be the right or wrong choice?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. When I came back to Ireland, I was very worried about that. So at that time, I was in Cambridge as a postdoc. And I applied for the job and I got it. And I suddenly thought, well, will I go back or won't I? Because Ireland was a backwater then. There was a bit going on. There were some very good people there actually at the time, but it was very low scale. There wasn't much money in science research. So it was a risk to go back because I mightn't have been able to fund my research or even recruit people. So I was a bit concerned, but I gave it a go. And actually, it was the best move ever because I could help Irish immunology then. It grew then as a subject. Lots of us came back around that time and we were part of that sort of growth in the area. And that was much more satisfying than being postdoc number 73 in a big lab in Harvard. But I hated that. So that, in other words, the message there would be you don't have to be going to these mega labs to be satisfied and achieve things. You can go down a different road if you want to make a difference in a different way. And that had a big influence on what I was doing.
What non scientific skills have been most critical to your career progression and how did you develop them?
Yeah, there's no doubt the communication part, even for definite, my interest in writing and that sort of stuff. And even though I write stuff for the general public, that can help you write scientific stuff as well, because you can have clarity of thought. So I think that those writing skills were very important in a way to help me write reviews and grants and stuff. I mean, if you write a review in a subject, you want people to read it and make it readable. Some science writing is atrocious. It bores you to tears. So the style of writing becomes important. I guess that might have been part of it, that my ability to write was a skill that was outside science. And then the other one was social skills. I mean, people don't realize science is a very social activity. The public think we're like on our own, like nerds in a lab somewhere, right? But we're actually quite social, like most humans, and that's a skill. Don't be frightened at conferences to go up to people or get talking to people or even your own peer group. It's always good to have a bit of a social aspect to this as well. I think that helps. It's not essential. Some scientists are completely antisocial and they're brilliant. So you don't need that necessarily, but it certainly helps. I think.
Probably it makes it more enjoyable as well.
Well, that's the key. That's the message. If you figure that my message today is enjoy what you're doing, otherwise you're doing something wrong, right? That's a key message, I think.
And how do you stay current with scientific advancements and continuously foster your professional growth?
Well, I'm always on PubMed. Let's start with that. I'm obsessive. I search for 4 or 5 things all the time. And nowadays, it's much easier, isn't it? We can see information very quickly now, be it on social media or otherwise. I keep an eye on developments all the time. The journals and what's being published, hugely important as well. And then the second thing is conferences. That's a really good thing to do because you go to other people's talks and you keep up on other people's areas, and then you might see something relevant to your work. So I think that they're the two main things. It's scanning the literature all the time and then going to conferences. They're the two main things.
And what skills do you feel are often overlooked yet essential for success, both in science overall and specifically in this area of immunology?
Yeah, I think the ones we discussed actually, that social aspect is an important skill. I think communication in terms of how you're writing, but also presenting. Because when you people are terrified of giving talks when you're a young student, it seems like the most daunting, and it is daunting. I was scared at one time. It's hard to believe it's true. As you get older, you get used to it and you learn. But that presentation skill is really important because, like, why do we tell people what we do? Like, why do we publish our work? Why do we give talks at conferences? It's to disseminate and tell people, and they may be influenced and may take the field further. This kind of thing. So if you communicate your stuff well, you might inspire someone else then to develop their work based on what you're telling them. If you're not good at communicating, that's okay, but it can be learned. And it's a missed opportunity. Like the whole reason we're discovering stuff is to help the field move forward, right? And then to be able to sort of optimize that, I think communication is a really important one.
And what's the most valuable piece of career advice you ever received?
The most valuable piece of career advice I ever received was just quit. No, that's a joke. The, the most valuable piece of career advice, be rigorous, probably. At my postdoc in Cambridge, I worked with a guy called Jerry Sackdavala, and he is easily my most important mentor. He was the most exacting scientist I've ever worked with. Right? So don't believe your own bullshit. Number one, he didn't say this in so many words, but that's the way he led his as a scientist himself. And be as rigorous as you can in terms of be as self-critical as you can of your own data. And that's really important. He was a great guy for saying if it's not tenfold, I don't believe it. He would say, "What's the point of statistical test? Because it should be clear. There should be a difference." So I think scientific rigor, that's a key piece of advice. And then we'll say it again, Ava, make sure you're having fun. I'll say it again. If you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. Okay.
How do you navigate the demands of high profile scientific career while maintaining a healthy work life balance?
Yeah, mainly alcohol. That's a joke. No, how do I navigate it? Well, that's a really good question for young academics. So when you get your first position as an assistant professor, you have so many demands, you know? There's your head of department probably getting you to do things. You have to teach a bit. You're probably got to write grants. You got to recruit people. You got to communicate even, and maybe you're commercializing. So it's very difficult to get that right initially, to get the balance right. When I was a young academic, one of my colleagues gave me a really good book. It was called How to Handle Multiple Demands, that because it's a real skill. So I think you've got to be very careful what your priorities are. And you got to remember, what is my priority? Your number one priority is to be a scientist to make discoveries. Never forget that. That's number one by far. Everything else is secondary to that. Now, you need to do other things in your job, I suppose, but that's the first thing. And that drives everything. If you make a big discovery, your head of department will love you. Your university will love you. So in other words, always focus on what the top priorities are. And the second big thing is be sure to say no to things. Because if you say yes to something and you're stuck in a meeting for 2 hours with someone who's not that good and then you've wasted those 2 hours of your life that could be done something else. So never be afraid to say no, and you get used to what to say yes to, and you say yes to stuff that has the priority, obviously, is the way to think of it.
And have there been sacrifices along your career path? And do you ever wish you'd chose differently?
I don't think so. No, I realized early on that I wanted this job of being a scientist. So never, once you've got the mission straight, your mission is that. Maybe your mission is to climb Everest. I don't know. But if you focus on the mission, and then you keep doing that, then you're going to be all right. Now maybe I would have sacrificed personal stuff because I'm so busy in work sometimes, and we all have that, don't we? For the balance, the work-life balance thing, and sometimes I might have made a slightly wrong decision there occasionally. We try and correct it, like make up for it. But it can be very all-consuming, so you got to be careful. You must have work-life balance. If you're just doing this, that'll drive you mad and you will lose your creativity anyway. So it's very important to have both aspects of your life. Otherwise, you may miss out on the science side as well. So, but but overall, no, there wouldn't be much I would regret in terms of sacrificing something over another.
What challenges and which opportunities do you see for the next generation of scientists?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, well, it's a fantastic business to be in, first of all, because there's so much to discover yet. Remember, we think we know a lot, but we don't. I mean, imagine when I began, getting back to our earlier part of our conversation, when we knew probably 10% of immunology that we know now. Isn't that remarkable? And all that discovery in the past 30, 40 years has been tremendous adventure. All these things have been discovered. And then they're relevant to disease, hopefully. That's the add on. Now, we still have a huge amount to discover. We still don't really know a lot. We still don't really understand what causes these diseases. Let's start with that one. And who would have thought metabolism would have come along as an area? That was unexpected. So there's many things that we've yet to discover. I'm not sure what they are, having said that, but there's a lot more to discover out there. So remember, you're in a field that's very sort of exciting and that loads of potential, I would say. The challenges, though, of course, are getting research funding is getting more difficult. There's more people in this business, so it's harder. On the European Research Council. We're pressing them to double our budget overall because a lot more people need to be funded. So funding is always an issue. And then the other thing is the times we live in are trickier, I think, because there's probably more demands on people than ever before in their jobs and what they're expected to do. And there's too many demands at times. So I think that's something to watch for. And you got to make sure that you're in a lab or in an institution that supports you in this regard. Otherwise, you might get stressed out, and that's not good to anyone. And I think, especially with social media, AI, of course, is what we all talk about. That's a great tool to use. Don't be frightened of that. Bring that in now as a method if you can. I think that's another opportunity really for us is to deploy these new. I mean, I remember the era before there was PCR. Can you believe it? When that was invented, that was a huge technique for us all. iiSIAR, a bit like that. It's going to be an enabling technology. But those are the kind of things that I would think are going to be challenging to people.
And what emerging trends or future directions in immunology excite you most? And what legacy do you hope to leave?
Good Lord, these are very tricky questions to answer. The emerging trends. Oh, good Lord. I think neuroimmunology is a fascinating area. There's more and more to be discovered there. Now, there's lots of stuff coming out already. There's the vagus nerve, for instance, there's ILCs. I follow this quite closely. And so that's a very interesting area, that brain immune axis. If we can learn more about that, it'd be brilliant because we know they're interconnected in so many ways.
To conclude, we would love to hear a standout moment from your career, perhaps something lighthearted, surprising, or out of the ordinary that you feel comfortable sharing with us.
Oh, there's a good one. Well, there's one experiment I would mention which blew my mind. Let's start with that. Okay. So it goes back to our first paper on NLRP3, one of our earlier papers, right? Where we got NLRP3 was driving IL-1 in type 2 diabetes. It was known that IL-1 could cause insulin resistance, and that's a key part of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And inflammation actually causes resistance to insulin. And that still isn't fully worked out, actually, what the connections are there. But we knew IL-1 was part of it. And then a referee said, okay, they get it. NLRP3 is driving IL-1 in type 2 diabetes. What about glucose metabolism? And I'm going, what? And they said, yeah, there were papers in the 80s that glucose was needed for IL-1. So we put 2-deoxyglucose on a macrophage to block glycolysis, and the IL-1 went to zero. It suppressed all the IL-1. And I went, what? Glycolysis is needed for IL-1? And that was a key eye-opening moment because then I figured, oh, that's interesting. Now, my lab at that time, we weren't doing metabolism at all. We had no interest in it. But once we saw that result, and it was night and day here, as I said earlier, a big effect. I'm going, what's going on here? And that led us to track glycolysis into Krebs cycle and to succinate in the end was the reason. And succinate was going up. And that was the thing that was driving the IL-1. And 2-deoxyglucose could block that flux into succinate. And so we kind of figured it out as well. And that to me was a key result because that changed my lab, that single result actually, because that was back in 2010. What's that, 15 years ago? And then I got a postdoc called Gillian Tannehill got involved, and then we began working on that. And that gave rise to much of my work in the past 10 years has been trying to figure this metabolic aspect out. So there's a moment that I would mention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva. And remember, as a scientist, don't trust a lot of stuff I say. Look for yourself. Find out stuff yourself. There's the message for you as well.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Climbing the Immune Ladder Steps for Success in Science iiSIAR podcast. A huge thank you to you, Luke, for sharing your insights, stories, and experience with us. We hope you found this conversation as inspiring and thought-provoking as we did. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to join us on the next episode and share it with anyone who might benefit from it. You can also follow us on our webpage or to stay updated on future episodes and innate immunity updates. Thank you for listening, and remember, persistence and asking the right questions are what drives science and maybe even your own journey. Until next time, stay curious.